Forge, episode number 25. I am here with the lovely cast today. We got Neuro, Diggs, Velux, Scott, and the most beautiful of lore men, Steve Danuser. And we are going to be having Scott, or Phantom X, prompting for us tonight. So, Scott, take it away.
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Friday evening. We are very happy to have Steve back on for a second time. Um, I'm not going to lie, my camera completely has shut you guys off. I'm seeing blank faces right now. So I'm
We're
just going
here,
to keep
though.
talking.
Yeah.
Um, no, we're very happy to have Steve join us, Warguard, as everyone knows. And I'm going to spend the evening talking about storytelling, content, everything that we can think of lore. What I really would like to start with, Steve, is just your background, your history. Everyone knows you obviously from your recent project, but there's a lot more to your story before that. Um, and I'm not sure everyone knows that. So if you wouldn't mind spending just a little bit of time kind of telling us how you came to be where you are now.
Well, it really started with playing games. So I had been I grew up on Ultima games, and that was one of the things that really inspired me to see that games could tell stories. And when Ultima Online came out, I jumped on that, even though you know, I I just wanted to play another Ultima game. I didn't think of the online side, but then I started making friends there, and I thought it was fantastic. Like this was the kind of game I wanted to play. And I heard about this game EverQuest. It was in development, and I didn't really want to switch out of Ultima Online at first because it had a lot of momentum for me. And then my 3D video card and stuff, and I had enough friends who were going to start playing the game when it came out that I kind of jumped in there. And like as soon as I saw this 3D world around me, I was like, oh man, this is crazy. And so I went headlong into playing EverQuest. And I had some friends of mine who were programmers, and they were looking for different projects that they could do on their own. And this was in the days before like WordPress or there was any, Blogger or any kind of blog software out there. And they had this idea of doing like a software package where people could make like a news website. And so they were working on this and they wanted a proof of concept on it. And we were all playing EverQuest at the time. And they suggested, I don't know who suggested, we came up with this idea of making an EverQuest news site. And so we created Mob Hunter, and I wrote most of the articles. And I was trying to approach it like there were already a lot of kind of rant sites out there. And I wanted to look at it like, well, so this is a game I love. And even though there's things about it I don't like, what could I do to kind of help things improve? So I tried to look at it from a more philosophical perspective and say, well, here's things that could be fixed, and here's how, I would suggest doing it. And it soon got the attention of people at SOE, like Scott Hartzman started emailing me and saying, "Hey, I like that article," and we started talking about stuff, and they ended up inviting me out to this community summit event. It was like the first one that they ever had, I think, and there were me and a bunch of other fan site people. And at that time, EverQuest 2 had just been mentioned, like they maybe put out like a screenshot or two or something. And I started talking to when I was out there at SOE, I started talking to some of the people on that team, trying to get information from them. They weren't any more forthcoming than they have been when you guys ask stuff. But at least, I got to know them. And a few months later, they reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in a community manager job on EQ2. And I said, yes, that would be awesome. So I moved to San Diego, started working on EverQuest 2, and it was about a year before launch that I was on there. And because I could write, and I'd always done that, since I was a kid, I got to help out on some design stuff and storytelling stuff, and that was really fun for me. And even though I loved doing the community stuff, over time I kind of gradually transitioned into doing more and more stuff on the design side until finally I decided to transition full-time into game design. So did that for a few years, up through the Echoes of Fadewar expansion for EQ2. Um, and then I got contacted by a baseball player named Kurt Schilling, who was interested in starting a video game company, and got myself involved in that and became one of the founding members of 38 Studios. And so I moved out to Boston. Had about 5.5 years of awesome times there until the company ran out of money. And then I ended up back at SOE and worked on Vanguard initially with a transition onto EverQuest Next and Landmark. And that's where I come into the story that you guys know.
Epic.
Yeah, I guess that when I was reading through where you've been on Mob Hunter, I didn't realize you had been a part of Vanguard, because I think a lot of us also spent some time there.
Well, just in the, to be clear, it was in the latter days. The game had already transitioned over to free to play, and they were looking to grow the team a little bit and hoping that by adding some members, it had basically been on life support for a long time, just kind of sitting there. And they had staffed it up and hoped that we could, bring in some new players. And we made some good strides with that game, I think, but it just ultimately wasn't enough. It's too old a game. There were too many problems with it, and we could just never get over that hump that people still had performance issues, and it was a really hardcore game, and so it could just never get enough traction to support the team. And
it's so unfortunate because it really was a truly innovative game. The idea of leveling up through diplomacy through a card game, the idea of leveling up through crafting, and the crafting minigame itself was so much fun. For me, the best part was all the grunts and groans that my dark elf made when he was trying to craft stuff and had failures and errors come up.
Do you guys want to explain really quick what that game is? Just, I'm sure there's a lot of people who probably have never even heard of it.
Yeah, sorry, Drew, I forgot your age.
Hey, man.
Yeah, I mean, Vanguard was developed by Sigil Games, which was founded by Brad McQuaid and Jeff Butler. And after they left Sony Online, it was, 2001, 2002, somewhere in there.
Like 11, yeah.
Someone can correct me. But it was formed with a lot of people who had been at SOE for a while. And they set out to make a more kind of hardcore game. And it had this really big, sprawling world. That's the thing that I liked most about it. It was really cool that you could see these vistas in the distance and you could get to them and look out over this kind of vast world. But it just had it was plagued by performance issues and a lot of bugs. Quality was a big issue. That was one of the things I tried to address when I got on the team was I wanted to release things that were at a high level of quality. And man, unfortunately, the engine, the development tools, like everything was just stacked against us. So it just, we weren't able to do the things that we wanted to do with it. But the game had such a devoted fan base. It was a small group of people, but they loved that game. And I was sad when SOE sunsetted it, because even though it was that small base of people, there was just so much love and so much dedication. I met up with many of them at SOE Live, and there's no more passionate gamers out there than the people who play Vanguard.
Yeah, Tanlin from the Evercast show, serious major fan. He's one, like somebody who constantly brings it up because for him it was the big game for the longest time, and I can see why.
It was his first, right?
I think it was one. No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was. So I think one of the interesting things for me, Steve, is that you've had a chance actually to create lore ground up, not once, but I guess twice now. And I can imagine that's challenging at times.
Well, yeah, that was one of the big draws for going to 38 Studios was that ability to start fresh from the ground up. As much as I enjoyed coming on to EverQuest 2, there was already a lot of stuff established with EverQuest, and so much of that was done kind of off the cuff. There wasn't a lot of forethought put into creating a cohesive story for that game. It came about kind of organically over time, and players filled in as many blanks as developers did in a lot of ways. So that draw, that ability to create a world, and with the team that we put together at 38, getting to work with R.A. Salvatore and other people was just a once in a lifetime experience. It was great.
And Reckoning was the precursor to the MMO. I
Yeah,
mean, not
so
not in terms of release, but I mean in terms or development, but in terms of story. The
uh,
story of Reckoning was before the story of MMO. Of the MMO.
Yeah, so the way we looked at it, like even from the beginning, when 38 Studios was founded, we had our office in Maynard, Massachusetts, and it was a company built to make an MMO. We hired MMO people, but we working with Bob Salvatore and the story team, we knew early on that what we were building in terms of a history and a lore for the world was bigger than one game, even a game as big as an MMO. And so we developed these tens of thousands of years of history. And uh, by doing that, we looked at these different ages of history, and we thought, this particular period would be really great for a single player RPG. This period would be really awesome for an RTS game. This period would be great for an MMO. And we wanted to create this history that would serve as the basis for an ecosystem of games. And when the opportunity came to acquire Big Huge Games, they had a single player RPG engine, but their IP was really weak. And it created a great opportunity for us to take this IP that we had and bring it to life in that engine. And so Reckoning told this very single player focused story that was still tied in thematically to what you were going to experience in the MMO. So if you played Reckoning, it was the story of being awakened, the first person awakened by this well of souls and brought back to life after having been killed. And it was that story, examining the implications of that we're going to come into play on a massive scale in the MMO, because fast forward to the time of the MMO, now the gnomes had created wells of souls all over the world. And so heroes were being brought back to life. And finding out what was behind that, what the mystery was behind what powered the well of souls, the trials that were facing the world. And it was really going to be about exploring all those facets of story. So it was just something that we, because of what happened with the company, we unfortunately didn't get to tell the conclusion of that story.
Yeah, I've always been a really I followed that game a little bit. I didn't get a chance. I played some of the demo on it early on, but it was something that I was really looking at because I've always been a fan of R.A. Salvatore as one of my favorite authors, and then seeing the way that story, the way the story rolled out, it looked like player agency was a big emphasis because of the whole fate. You get freed from a fate, and it really emphasizes this player agency, which was kind of had been drifting in that year of MMOs. So it was cool to see you guys like working towards something like that, which unfortunately didn't get to finish out on that, but. Is that something that you look at a lot in a project with any current projects? I know, like when you started in with the EverQuest Next Landmark team, obviously player agency is one of the big factors that you guys were designing into that game. How much does that weigh into what you value in an MMO?
Well, yeah, I think player agency is one of those things that you almost took for granted in the EverQuest days, because there was no single storyline kind of leading you through it. You discovered things on your own, and no one was telling you where to go or what to do. They weren't saying that there was a camp over the hill where there were people with question marks over their heads that you could take their quests and stuff. It was just like, find the place in the world that is right for your level and do stuff. And when EverQuest 2 and WoW were both being developed kind of simultaneously, it's interesting that both of them gravitated towards quests as the thing that was going to guide people through the world. And it seemed, at the time, like, oh, this is a great way to tell story. This is, finally all these things that we wanted players to see and understand, we'll be able to lay out in front of them. And it certainly did that. It presented the story in a way that hadn't been possible in Ultima Online or EverQuest. But unfortunately, it also did it in a way that made it kind of get in the way of gameplay. So when we were looking at the next generation of MMOs beyond that, going back to that sense of allowing players to find the story in the world was something certainly that we wanted to do on EverQuest Next, and also wanted to do in a different way on Copernicus.
So, how did the questing for EQ2 and WoW get it? What do you mean by it got in the way of gameplay?
Because I mean that in the sense of questing became kind of not questing in and of itself, but dialogue trees and just the fact of having to click through a bunch of stuff to get to the fun of the game. It ended up not, having these long conversations with NPCs. From a designer standpoint, it's like, oh, I want to tell this great story and players are going to love it. They're going to see all these dialogue trees and interact with NPCs and the world's going to come alive. And really, they just wanted to get to the action. They wanted to get to the rewards. They wanted to get to the fun. So certainly there were still players who loved doing that, and they love taking their time and reading everything that's put before them. But the majority of gamers just wanted to get to the action. And when you put it behind massive dialogue trees and things like that in an MMO, it becomes a barrier in a way.
And plus, people were skipping through the dialogue anyway. I had a couple at Activision. Their 4-year-old was playing WoW. Couldn't read, but he could get through the first 5 levels of any class, so he would just run around and do all the stuff, and people would wonder why he wasn't talking to them, but it's because he didn't need to read the quests. He could just go through and do them. So yeah,
I want to kind of like tangent a little bit to come back to the original concept. So I mean, do you think that people really do you think that having that people have to read through all that text is actually bad, or where would you want to see it progress? Essentially, where would you want to? What do you think would be better than those just scrolls with 2-page essays on it about the lore?
And I'm actually wondering if you could maybe tie that into Reckoning, because I don't remember it feeling like that in Reckoning. Like we were going through dialogues. It seemed like it was a very organic move through the story.
So let me be clear. I'm not hating on dialogue trees and things like that. I mean, I love playing BioWare games. I liked playing Star Wars: The Old Republic. I thought that was a lot of fun. And I am the person who sat there and enjoyed the cutscenes. I enjoyed the dialogue options and things like that with NPCs. Where that game let me down was in the zone design and other things like that. But I enjoyed their presentation of story. And I think that you can do a game like that and present story that way to a high level of quality. But I don't think that the quality was always there with certainly at the launch of EQ2. They've improved it tremendously in the years since. But we're just very limited on the tools that we had to tell stories at that time. And so we thought, well, we'll make up for these deficiencies through writing as well as we can, and giving lots of stuff for players to read and click through. And I just don't think that ultimately it ended up pleasing the majority of players on that. I think that as more tools came online and you could do things with more NPCs, interactions, through kind of scripting them and having them do stuff in the world rather than just talk about doing stuff in the world, then it became much more powerful. And I think Old Republic and games like that were able to do that. And by the time, to tie it back into Reckoning, that game had some pretty powerful narrative tools in terms of the animations that you could give characters, and they had really good voice talent on there, and that really helped to kind of sell the story.
Claudia
So it
Black
didn't feel
was
burdensome.
the narrator, I think, or something. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
it was a really good cast that they had for that game,
Mhm.
and it was well written. They had a really good team of writers at BHG. I was really happy to work with them, and just reading the stuff that they were coming up with was a real treat.
I think
You
in
know,
that. Go ahead.
there's something that I wanted to say that I actually remember from my experience playing a lot of MMOs. The reason why I didn't read and get through a lot of the content, especially content in areas that were kind of restricted and hard to get to, is because I was always with a group, and the group had either already read it or they didn't care. So group skip is definitely kind of a problem with lore, because you'll come across something, and on one hand, you want to read it, you want to take it in, understand it. You might sit there and take notes while everyone else is like, all right, okay, I know what's going on. Like, yeah, this guy's just directing us where they're just looking for keywords and then moving on, basically. So
Hmm.
that to me is go ahead. What like
Well, yeah, I mean that still happens in WoW, you know? Like I play WoW, and if you do Dungeon Finder, for example, you get thrown in there with a bunch of people, and if it's the first time that you're doing a dungeon, I always like to, WoW takes a lot of time, and they put a lot of little things you can click on and little story bits you can get and things that the NPCs say, and I love that stuff. And so when I go through the dungeon, I want to stop and listen to it, but you've got a group and they're just kind of tearing you through, you don't get to do that, and so it does become a problem.
I think
Yeah.
the only time I got in a group to talk to any NPC for any length of time was the guy in, I think it was one of the first Blackrock area, where you go up some debris path and there's some hidden dude for some little amulet quest. I think that was the
Uh-huh.
only time we actually, that and maybe like, some NPC you have to talk to learn a skill, but it was only just to do that.
Yeah, I was as far back as like Scarlet Monastery and stuff like that. Like I can remember getting dragged through that with people, as I was trying to level up and stuff. And I was like, wait, why is this guy doing this? Why, I want to hear what is going on. And like, no, just kill stuff. We gotta go. We gotta move. And it's
But
unfortunate
I
that
think there
that's the
was
experience that especially if it's the first time that people get.
And you did have to move though, because the spawns would just pop right back up on you.
Well, you had to keep moving, but like there were little books that you could click on and stuff like that, and I always wanted to do that. So
It it
uh,
feels like as the as MMOs have progressed, and even taking from what happened in the original EverQuest and how you get to the end of that, and a lot of the really fun stuff happened in the late game, and as new MMOs came out, they kind of thought, how else can we keep players entertained once they've, reached the max level because of the way the level system works, and it seems like that happened long enough that people's focus is now on the end game, and so it's really put lore, and story to a disadvantage, like an uphill battle of trying to find ways to allow players to experience it when so many players are focused on just getting to the late game mechanics, and I think that was one thing that really made me gravitate towards EverQuest Next, because of the fact that you're eliminating the leveling system is one barrier to that, and then the way that you guys talked about doing your AI, where the NPCs would react to you and remember what you did. So now if you're in a group with some people, you kind of have to pay attention to what the NPCs are saying to them, because you don't know if it's going to affect you by association. So it seemed really cool, and I'm hoping that they still continue to move in that direction. But what it is there other things that you guys were looking at with that project? Is like, hey, we need to make sure we eliminate this barrier for story or things like that.
And before
um,
you answer, and like not only what you guys were doing with that particular project, but in general, I'd like to know as well. Like, are there any ideas that you have maybe originally that would also help assist? That have nothing to do with EQN.
well, I think I've written a couple bits on Mob Hunter about trying to tell smaller stories within the game that fit together to kind of make up a bigger story, and that's certainly one of the things that we were trying to do. The um, taking the time to invest in world building for an MMO, I think, is extremely important. And world building is different than just coming up with stories, because there's a different discipline involved. And I really came to appreciate that through my time at 38 Studios. I've known a lot of people in gaming who are really good dungeon masters, and they can put together a campaign, they can, lay out dungeons, they can do all this stuff, and they're really good at it. But that doesn't mean that they're a good world builder. It's a different kind of discipline and a different kind of mindset. And you need to go, you need to think of the world differently when you're really creating something from the ground up. You need to think about how the different pieces interact, how the different races have intertwined throughout history, and what that means for the characters in the campaign that you're creating. So, and working with Bob Salvatore was incredibly, it was like a master's class in world building, because he was so good at doing that and creating a world that felt real, that had real connections. And he was always trying to hammer that home with us, like, what do these guys create? What do they make? What do they build? What do they trade with other people? How would that make other nations feel about that? And so we tried to do that with Amalur. And I think that world had a really super cohesive feel because of that. And I tried to, when coming on to EQ Next, tried to approach the story that we're building from the same way, and just adding those extra layers of depth and feeling and connection between pieces. And I think if you do that, and if you invest that time, then you can create something that is this whole kind of background for the stories that you can tell in game. And if you do it right, those little stories that you're telling on a moment by moment basis, they feel connected with one another. And so that's what we were working towards on EQ Next.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say, even the little tidbits that we were getting of Amalur, like somehow I think we were getting snippets of what would be coming for the MMO of lore, and just even adding that to what we were getting with Reckoning was just captivating. Awesome job there. And yeah, it does feel like the timeline for EQ Next kind of followed that same in-depth history that we saw with Amalur.
Yeah, I still have this this game guide.
Oh yeah.
That is just full of, it has the usual maps and hints and tricks and all that kind of thing. But we also tried to infuse a lot of lore into this and seed a lot of hints for what was going to come into the MMO. And what was really awesome. So what we would do at 38 is that we would have what's called story time. And so every month or two, whenever we had a bunch of new people who had come on, we would invite those people, as well as open it up for anybody else in the company who wanted to come. And we would sit in a big room together. We had this one floor of our building that was basically like one huge meeting area. And we had a little stage, and so and Bob would come down, and he and I would do this presentation where Bob would start out and he'd talk about kind of the history of the world, how the pieces came together to form kind of the skeleton of our story and what our philosophies were about it. And then I would come on and I would talk people through kind of the history of Amalur, and talk about where the different games were set and stuff like that. And we'd spend, it'd take like an hour and a half, and then we would sit with everybody, and we'd bring pizzas in, and everyone could sit around and just talk and share stories. And what I always said was, I always started by saying, you may wonder why this is a good idea. Like, we bring everybody here. We bring receptionists. We bring engineers, not just game designers or artists. We want everyone in the company to come to the story meeting. And the reason we do it is because if you can take this story and internalize it, it's going to come through in the work that you do. If you believe in this story and you love it and champion it, it doesn't matter what you do for the company, that story is going to come through in your work. And if we all do that, if we all feel that story and believe it, then it's going to make the game just have this extra layer to it that maybe even people can't perceive it, but it's just going to be there, and it's going to help story to come alive in this world and in these games that we're making. And when I could be walking down the hallway like a month later and a QA person would stop me and say, oh man, I was thinking about this one thing and it would be so cool if this happened. Or I'd get like, we'd be designing a zone and I'd go and see what the artist was making. And they said, oh, well, I remembered that thing that you said about this battle that had happened here. So I put these props in that would help tell this story. And everyone was just doing that. It becomes a very powerful thing, and you really get the whole studio kind of working together on this project to help it come to life. And I knew that it was working and what we were doing was at a high level of quality when there were those people on the team were showing how they had bought into it. It was one of my, the things I always treasure about working there.
It seems like you guys were doing something slightly similar. I mean, you were doing your lore differently with EverQuest Next in, presenting it as books, but it seemed like I've seen a lot of the developers tweet out, about reading the books and really enjoying them. Is that something you guys did there? Like all the people working on the game are required to read all the lore?
At SOE, you mean?
Yeah, at Daybreak over there at SOE Daybreak.
Yeah, Daybreak. Well, yeah, it was certainly encouraged. I mean, we obviously had that available to people, and it was really cool. Something similar happened to me. One day I was out. We have different food trucks that would come around at noontime, and one day I was out at the food truck, and I'd placed my order, and I was just kind of standing there, doing my thing, checking messages on my phone, and somebody came up to me that I hadn't met before, and he said, "Hey, I recognized you from, I know you're Morgard. I've seen you on the live streams and stuff like that. And, I just want to tell you I'm in QA. And so I go over EQ stuff. And so I've been in the wiki and I devour it. I just love it. And I think the story that you guys are making is really awesome. And you have a great team. And, he was super excited about it. And that kind of, unsolicited enthusiasm was like, oh man, that's so great. That's, I want everybody to feel that way. And, no matter where I end up next, whatever kind of project I'm on, I'm going to do everything I can to keep fostering that kind of enthusiasm, because if you make the story available to people and allow them to buy into it, if what you're doing is quality work, they will, because we're all in this business because we love stories and we love either telling them or experiencing them or both. And that kind of classic, gather around the storyteller, gather around the campfire and listen to these stories. That's something that's in humans' DNA. And so we all love that. And if you can build off that as a game designer, as a storyteller, there's a lot of power there that you can tap into, and it can make a very memorable experience.
Now, we talked a lot about like MMOs in the games, and it sounds like a lot of what you're saying. I see how an MMO can, at face value, like really need that lore to be such a great game and have it all pull it together. But I mean, have you worked on, or do you think of any other game types that maybe don't get as much lore loving that could use it, that you think, like maybe could help amplify a different kind of game that isn't an MMO?
Well, I don't think that you should force story on a game if it doesn't need it. There's certainly people who want to try to do that in a lot of different ways, and I think it can get in the way of just the play of a game. I use the example that Frogger isn't going to be any more fun if you know the character's backstory and things like that. Pac-Man doesn't need a really deep lore behind it to be fun, and certainly there's games out there now that don't do a lot of story, or at least not a lot of storytelling within the game in an overt kind of way for players. And they're still massively popular games. So I think what you need to do is make story appropriate to the type of game you're making, and never let your desires as a game designer or writer or anything force you to overdo it. Like
Yeah.
when you look at movies, the great movies are great in no small part because they have really good editors who work on them and films. And in games, we tend not to have editors, and we should, because what you take away, what you can narrow the experience down to is really important, and you want to get things as concise as possible. So if it's a game that calls for story, it's great to have it. But if it isn't, let the game breathe and let it be what it needs to be.
Yeah. That's actually something I wanted to ask you about was, for some games, it seems like all the story is there for is just to set the scene. You could be in the forest with a sword and a bow and arrow, or you could be in the jungle with a machete and an assault rifle. I mean, it's just giving different settings, or whatever other setting you want to put it in. It's pretty much just the wrapper for the game. And I think of like Contra, for example. That could have just been any other sort of game; it would work just fine. But for games that actually do want to use story, what are the main things that they want to focus on and emphasize to make sure that the story and the lore and everything isn't just a wrapper for the gameplay?
Well, that's a tricky question because if you read there's a mailing list for writers associated with the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, that I subscribe to, and
I remember.
so many times the stories, well, the experiences that people as game writers have is they're often brought in late to a project. So the game has been designed, it's been developed, and the gameplay is pretty much nailed down, and they've got kind of the scope kind of laid out, and they say, oh, okay, now it's time to bring a writer in and put a story on top of this. And that's frustrating for writers in particular, because if we're involved earlier in the process, then we can make something that the story is much more a cohesive part of. If you bring a storyteller in late to a project, the story is going to feel tacked on because it is. And there's only so much that you can do when the gameplay has been set up and the levels have already been designed and the characters' powers are all defined. There's not a lot of hooks for you to put the story in. So one of the virtues of working on MMOs is that they have a lot longer lead time. Story is something that's generally more valued by people who are developing the game, and so you have the luxury of tying story in more ways than just dialogue and cutscenes and things like that. So I think that's one of the things that was really awesome on EverQuest Next, was being able to work side by side with people like Michael Mann, and as mechanics are being conceptualized, finding ways to, hey, we could weave the story in this way to it, and things like ability names or how certain gameplay systems work could take on aspects of the lore and tell their own story through gameplay. So I think it's very powerful, no matter what kind of game you're making, if you can have that kind of eye towards the story and tie them in together. And story doesn't have to get in the way of gameplay; it can enhance gameplay and make it feel, again, like this more thoughtful, kind of cohesive experience.
Gotcha.
People,
I was going to say one last thing. In terms of going away from a more traditional approach in a game with procedural elements for how the story is told or how interactions can happen, are the considerations like really strongly different than more of a normal traditional sort of game, or is it really just a completely different beast?
Well, I would say it was a very different way of thinking about it, because traditionally, WoW, EverQuest 2, The Old Republic, games that are very much about creating content that players chew through. You're trying to tell these stories through the content itself, and you have a certain amount of tools in your storytelling toolbox that you get to use, and you're always in this battle of, we need enough quests to fill out this area. And it almost, I can remember in the early days of EQ2, we were trying to, fill quotas of quests, and you're never going to get the quality and the good focus on storytelling that you want by having to meet certain quotas. And the advantage of of working on a more sandboxy game where the stories are kind of embedded in the world is that it's not about meeting quotas. It's about making this world that has enough of those hooks in it that players can absorb a story as they're going about the fun that they're playing. And so it really is about letting the story be the backdrop, at least the scripted story that you're making as a game designer, and letting putting these hooks in the world that players can grab onto, and as they're having fun playing the game, start putting pieces of story together, and there's enough richness in the world that they can go as deep as they want with that, and be as invested in the lore as if there were reams and reams of dialogue for them to read. It's just a different way of finding the story.
You mentioned sandbox. Just real quick while we're on the topic, you mentioned sandbox. That was actually one of my questions or thoughts, because you mentioned not forcing story on people. And I can imagine, do you think it's more difficult to actually write the story, the lore for a sandbox type game than more theme park? I mean, how do you find that more challenging, or how to deliver it?
It's
how
interesting
to just create
because when I was in the my early days of first coming to work on EverQuest 2 and coming at it from EverQuest, I was super anti-sandbox. Like Star Wars Galaxies really had no appeal for me. Like from my point of view, it was like, man, you had EverQuest, you get the Star Wars license. Why isn't this EverQuest Star Wars? It just didn't click with me. And even though I had loved Ultima Online, I didn't think of it in sandbox terms. I just thought of it as this world that I was already familiar with, and I got to explore it, and there's these other people around trying to steal my Black Pearl and kill me in the bottom of a dungeon. And but I didn't think of it in terms of a sandbox. And so I became kind of this like, oh, sandbox games, why would I ever want to do that? And probably came in with that attitude initially at 38, where I didn't think of, I don't want to make a sandbox game. I want to make something that's, the content is handcrafted and it gives you this story experience. But, more and more as I thought about it, and as I went back to those roots of even EverQuest, I came to realize how much of I really did enjoy that sandbox experience of finding the story and pulling it in for myself rather than having it handed to me. And that's one of the things that really excited me about when I started working on EverQuest Next, was that the plans were to have this, the procedural content. And I looked at that as a really fun design challenge. And I think that, working on the team, we had a really strong ideas about how to make that come to life. So I'm still excited to see what the team does with that. I think there's a huge amount of potential. And I think that the story experience can be just as rich. You just have to think about crafting it a different way. And it's not about, writing 90 nodes of dialogue for a character. It's about showing what a character does in the world, showing what it cares about, showing what it's fighting for, and then letting players see, oh, that's who this guy is. That's what, she wants to do in the world. That's what he does, whatever it is. Putting the pieces together in their own minds. If you can figure out the story for yourself, then you've got this extra layer of investment in it. And I think that's a huge potential that sandbox games have that more curated content games don't, from that same angle.
And if you like it, you want to go find more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, It'll drive you.
People call me crazy because
Not
I
crazy.
think Zen is, yeah, he said it many times, through our loregasm thing, because I feel like when I go through and read the EverQuest Next lore, which, as somebody who's been writing for things and writing reviews and reading them multiple times, like I feel like when I read the book, I can see the core gameplay mechanics in the book. Like I can feel the grails in the lore, and it makes me wonder like how much of that was like, all right, these are our grails, let's write the lore on our grails, or how much was, let's establish our grails, based on what we think makes sense, when you're telling a story. So I kind of wonder if it was like leans more one way or the other, and also what you kind of, when you're in that process and you're going through and editing and slimming things down, do you watch for things like that, like where you see gameplay mechanics kind of coming to life in the book, and is that something that you aim to have in the lore book since they are being designed for a game?
Well, so we thought about that initially with the short stories, the novellas, and ultimately we didn't want to make stories that were personifications of a video game. The game is one way of telling story. These novellas were a different way, and I think most of the video games adapted into book form that I've read, you come into those moments where you realize that they're trying to describe a video game thing, and to me that is usually a pitfall that disconnects me a little bit from the experience. So we didn't try to say, oh, well, the game's going to play this way, so let's rewrite this scene so that it shows what a mechanic might be or something like that. Obviously, we have characters. Corlin is using magic in the stories. Karamor is fighting. But we didn't say, you know what, we really need him to do a certain move here and give it this name. That's going to be an ability. We didn't want to do that. We wanted the story to live on its own and let the story be a great story and let the game be a great game, and rather than trying to force them to compromise with one another.
That was one scene I actually liked from the Fall of Bastion. Is before the battle, Corlin. Spoiler alert: Corlin is sitting there going over basically the different spells in his arsenal, and that kind of to me translated like he's lining up his hotbar for the battle that's coming up.
Well, it's people have had a year to read that story, by the way, so I don't think we need to give them spoiler warnings. People should be reading those stories; they're really good. Um, but no, it wasn't the intent to describe what sitting and medding and rearranging your hotbar is like in the world itself. I think that people certainly can project that onto the story if they want to, but it wasn't something that we were trying to do deliberately.
I want to ask a little bit about. So you recently just talked about EverQuest 2, and then we talked about EverQuest Next, and talked about the lore and how to deal with procedural versus theme park style and sandbox and whatnot. And so my question to you now is, one of the interesting things about EverQuest 2 to EverQuest Next is that you guys actually rebooted the entire lore, and you were there from EverQuest 2 to EverQuest Next. I'm just curious, like, is that a process that you had ever done before? And like, were there any fun parts about rebooting, or was it a hassle? How did you feel about that whole process?
Well, I'd never done anything like that before, because even with working on EverQuest 2, what we had done very deliberately was say, okay, this is the same world as EverQuest. It's 500 years in the future. And so we came up with reasons for why things had changed, why the shattering had happened, and all this kind of stuff. But at least at that point in time, we did want to have a sense of continuity to things that said, okay, if you could take the Norath of EverQuest and go forward in time, this is the world that you'd be in. I think they've done some things with the timeline since then that explains it's more of a divergence and a different reality and all that kind of thing. But we wanted that continuity to begin with. And when I came on to EverQuest Next, the decision had already been made to do a reboot instead of a continuation. And so the team and I really tried to embrace that and tried to take advantage of the opportunities that gave, because as I alluded to before, when EverQuest was originally made, there wasn't, those guys didn't know that it was going to be a game that was going to last 15 or more years. There's just it didn't occur to anybody. They were hoping it would last a year and then they could make something else, that kind of a thing. So there wasn't that kind of concerted world building investment. It was built from the D&D campaigns of Bill Trost and Tony Garcia and people like that. So it had that kind of sense of things kind of, this conglomeration of pieces kind of being put together, and things didn't always fit, and there weren't always reasons for why things were the way they were. It was just kind of in that. And so, learning the lessons that I did at 38, that was what, in my own work I tried to do when coming on to EverQuest Next, was say, okay, we have all these big things that people love about the franchise. How do we take those? How do we connect the dots a bit better? Change what doesn't work, make some different choices, and we can make something that's new and different and that is more inherently connected from the ground up, because now we know that games can last 15, 20 years. So let's make something that can stand up to that. So that was the approach that we took, and we had great people like that Ryan Barker, who was there before me, and you've got Paul Molina and Josh Augustine now who are there on the project, and we just tried to make something that felt like a great EverQuest game, but that had its own identity. So it was an interesting challenge. It posed a lot of interesting problems, and it we always had to question our decisions, because it was like, well, are we doing that just because EverQuest did it this way, or are we doing the opposite just because we want to be different from EverQuest? And ultimately, we realized that we just have to do what's best for the story for this game that we're making. And the more and more that the story developed, the more it took on a life of its own. And I always say that you're onto something good with a story when the story almost tells you what needs to happen. We were at 38 Studios. We were in a design meeting one day, and we're talking, because we had this multi-year story arc that was all planned out for Amalur. And we had this big city that you may have seen screenshots of that's called Valiance. And it was like the center of all the order races, all the good races. And it was this beautiful capital, this sprawling city, a huge statue towering over it. And we were talking about the events that were going on in the world. And through the course of our conversation, we realized that Valiance was going to have to be destroyed in the course of the story. And we tried like, well, no, we can't do that. We don't want, because we didn't want to. We love the city that we're making. We had invested all this history, all this time, all this stuff. But the story could not be denied. That had to be what happened. And that same kind of thing started happening on EverQuest Next, where as we had developed this deep history and this world, and we were looking ahead to what the story of Norath would be, it started telling us what it needed. So when you do it right, storytelling shifts at some point along the way from being, hey, we're putting stuff in, to we're archaeologists and we're brushing away dust and finding these bits of story that are there, and it's telling us what it needs to be. We just have to find it. And that's a really powerful place to be as a storyteller. That's something that just excites you and fills you with enthusiasm for the project.
I mean, I just am really enthused to just listen to that story. Like the concept of being an archaeologist and brushing off the dirt to find a story. That is just inspiring, period. It's such a cool idea that that you can be together with these people who all have, I guess, a general desire for good high fantasy lore, and you guys can just unintentionally create this this story. It's almost like, who's the master, you or the lore? I don't really even know.
It reminds me of R.A. Salvador's his legacy of Drizzt, that. At this point, it's like that story is writing itself. Bob is he has no control over his characters to some extent. They just have their personalities and they're gonna act. Really interesting, really good story. So,
So I think we have been logging a lot of questions. At least Zen, I hope you have been. I'm going to ask you to read them, actually.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot. Before we get going, I want to start with the very first one that I have on my screen from Stoneglade. It says, "Can Morgard be a regular on the show?" Okay, we're going to move on from there.
At least you threw
Actually,
it out
Zen,
there.
if you do have the list.
Yeah, I do. I do have a list. There was only 4 serious questions besides the one about Steve making a fan fiction of Mia Neverett. But so the first question was to Morgard. Would you work on Amalur again if you had the chance?
Oh, in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
In a heartbeat.
Bam.
It's I carry that world with me every day, and I could sit here for hours and tell you stories about it. It's part of my DNA at this point, and it's sitting on hard drives in Rhode Island. So, and that's a really hard thing, you know. But the whole team, we had such a great team working at 38 Studios and Big Huge Games, and we've all stayed in contact with one another. We still help each other out. When the layoffs happened, I got reached out to by so many people, offering me leads or offering me just support. And it's a testament to the work that we did there. And there's so many stories left to tell in Amalur. It would be great if somebody had the rights to it and could do it. If maybe I should, if you want to send me money, I'll try to buy the thing.
Kickstarter fan project.
Yeah.
well, as a follow up to that
Somebody
question,
mentioned-
what was your favorite part of that when you were designing the story for that game? What was your favorite part? In that whole process. It doesn't have to necessarily be story. It could be people or whatever it was.
Oh man, working with Bob Salvatore, and he had a guy, a lifelong friend of his that he'd played D&D with for many years, named Mike Ledger, and Mike ended up being a designer with us, and like he and I were the intertwined on the story stuff. We were at the forefront of putting it all together. And just that kind of experience of we had a really good content team, and we could sit around together and talk about these ideas, and seeing that foundation, that skeleton get meat on the bones, that's so fun. It was just such a great experience, especially when we were just starting out and it felt like us against the world. If you can ever have that kind of experience, I recommend it highly. It's fantastic and a lot of fun.
Cool. The next question that we had.
Yeah, I think
sorry. You guys want me to keep going? Or?
I was just saying, somebody in chat mentioned Kickstarter to get it going again. But anyways.
I mean, I would say, Steve, if you start streaming, I'm just throwing that out there. If you get a Kickstarter going, you have some talent in a lot of ways. So
well, I appreciate that, but I think the problem with doing a Kickstarter on that, without taking too much time to talk about it, would be that we're still at the mercy of Rhode Island, and I'm not convinced that they actually want to sell it to anyone. Because politicians are involved, there's a certain amount of value they have at being able, because they've gotten offers on it. I know people who've made offers on it, and they've turned them down. And part of it might be because it's in certain politicians' best interest to say, well, that game had no value. See, it was a big waste of money. I told you that we shouldn't have given them that loan, and all these kinds of things. And so there are certain people benefiting from having all that IP sitting on hard drives inaccessible to the world. So I don't know that no matter how much money we kickstarted, that it would ever be enough to buy it.
I got a pitchfork. I mean, I'm just saying. Anyway, the next question. I mean, this is kind of like goes hand in hand, and obviously things have been very up in the air. But the question was, do you have any idea, what you want to do next? Where do you see yourself going?
Well, I love working in games, so I'm looking at different opportunities that are out there. It was as rough as getting laid off is. Um, Daybreak was very kind to all of us and gave us all some much needed runway, so that I can take a little bit of time and look around. And I've already had discussions with some people, and I'm exploring different options. So um, part of me would like to stay. I'm always in MMOs. That's the kind of game that I love most. Uh, and I would certainly welcome to be on another MMO project. But parts of me think about, well, what other kinds of games are out there that would be interesting to tell stories in. So I'm kind of weighing all options right now. So we'll see what's out there and where I would be a good fit.
Awesome. And to talk about that too, you said that's kind of why I was asking before about the different kinds of games where you see lore tying in, because we talked about this actually before the show started. A game that I play 5 days a week on my stream is League of Legends, and it's really interesting because they started off kind of in a situation where they didn't need the lore to be successful, and then just recently they're like really hitting it hard. They're reworking a bunch of their champions specifically, like part of their they even have a whole category of rework where they rip out their allure and just give them a whole new place in the world. So it is interesting. I as somebody who loves lore, I had a show called Loregasm with Velux. You know that. I love lore. I still can find a really cool story from from MOBAs, and I'm wondering if other games, like RTSs obviously have some story to them. I wonder if there are other games that will sprout out of the ground as MMOs unfortunately look like they're starting to dwindle down.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things about being in the age that we're in now, even if you look at movies, you find people realize there's value in IPs. That Marvel makes these awesome movies that are so much fun, and people have invested in that world because they took the time to do the movies right and to create this interconnected experience. And I think game companies have really started to learn that as well, that there's value in IP. And it's one thing to have a game itself that's successful, but if you can have an IP that's really strong behind it, you can leverage that into so many other things. So I think it's great that companies are more and more realizing that, and that creates opportunities for people like me. So I'm happy about that.
Well, I'm just for you, I'm gonna like lobby for a League of Legends MMO, and it's not because I want it at all. I promise. All right, cool. One of the next questions was, can you talk a little bit about how games expose players to the design role for their players? This one was by Sog, actually.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how games expose players to the designed role for their players? I actually don't. Maybe like.
Zog, you want to rephrase that in chat or Skype?
It's. It sounds kind of like what he's asking is how, a game developer goes about using the story to kind of design the player experience, maybe, of, helping them establish what it is they're supposed to do in the world, maybe, I think. If not, you can always answer that one.
Well, it goes back to, knowing the kind of game that you're trying to make and creating a story that serves the game. That can't be overstated how important that is, because if you run into a situation where you have storyteller, narrative people on a team who are like, hey, we have the story that we want to tell, and they just myopically think of it that way, or you have mechanics people who are like, well, this is the game that we want to play it, and we're not thinking about anything else except this experience. Things are going to feel tacked together. They're going to feel like it was bolted on. So the more that you can think of both things holistically, intrinsically tied together, the stronger both parts of that are going to be. So don't make a story that doesn't fit the type of game that you're trying to make. Obviously, when you start out a project, what you need to know is what the scope of the game is that you're making, what your pillars are, the core features, all that kind of stuff. You need to know that and keep it in mind, and everybody needs to be bought into that. And you should be crafting a story that fits those things, that enhances those things, because if you don't, you're doing a disservice to the game.
Cool. Thanks for that. Thanks for the answer.
Catch Sog's follow up so that we don't lose it. You see it? I
Okay.
just posted it in Skype.
Okay.
All right. Definitely. So yeah, the next question was.
Wait, no. Read his thing.
Right
When
now?
the game, yeah.
Then read it. Go ahead.
So he explained that the question was, when the game is designed, player characters are meant to play a part in the story. How do you lead them to do that to help create the cohesive experience?
Right. So it goes back to one of the things that I've alluded to, where you're using the story as the backdrop for the things that you want players to be doing. And one of the problems with traditional content in MMOs is that because you were so limited in the tools that you had, you basically kind of had to make one outcome for everything, and everyone experiences the same outcome. And so it's really hard to get players to feel like they've actually changed something, that they've had agency in it, because they almost never do. Because they're just playing by a script. They're essentially reading through a script that somebody else wrote for them. So the real power of doing dynamic content, of doing AI-driven content, is that you can allow player agency to create different outcomes. And you, as a designer, need to think of content differently. You have to be willing to let things go. You have to be get really McConaughey about it, and just say, like, well, just let it go, and just let players drive the story. And it's really hard for most game designers to do something like that, because we're so, there's some game designers who are like almost like they're failed movie directors, because they so want to control things and they can't get a Hollywood big budget movie, so they're going to do it through video games, and they're going to drive this story home and make everyone experience this grand vision that they have. And to do the sandbox MMO right, you need to let it go, and you need to set things in motion, put pieces in the world that are able to interact with one another in a variety of different ways, some of which you didn't conceive of as a game designer. And you need to be able to have the confidence in what you're doing to say, okay, I'll let it play out and let players find that story for themselves, even if it's not the story I might have wanted to tell as a designer, all the way through.
Do you, from kind of to follow that up from your inside perspective of watching Landmark and maybe seeing other people in the industry react to what you guys were doing, do you feel like the success you guys had with Landmark, of how people took the voxel engine and went to town with it and discovered new techniques, and with the workshop, how people are making like unbelievable stuff, do you feel like a response from game developers elsewhere has been like, that's an example that this user-generated content can really take off, and not just the game mechanics, but maybe with story-driven content as well?
Well, I think so. One of the interesting things that happens in the industry is that there tends to be a lot of parallel development. And what I mean by that is, for fans, it's very natural to look at two different game companies that are making products and say, oh, they're ripping off that one, or they're trying to riff off that. When in reality, these concepts have been in development for some time independently, but there's kind of a natural, we all as developers look at the industry, where things are certain, where they're going, and we always try to think ahead to, like, oh, where's this leading? Where is it going? And you try to get ahead of the competition. But sometimes the competition is thinking the same way, and they come to very similar conclusions that you have. So you saw that, even as we were in the early days of Landmark, you saw games like Trove come out that had looked at the same things that we looked at on Landmark. Like Jeff and Darren were huge players of Terraria, for example, and they loved that game. And so there was elements of that coming to life in Landmark. Well, that's coming to life in other games as well. And, Minecraft, of course, the explosion of that And that was a game that, again, is a great example of it doesn't need a big story. It has a few little hooks in it, and players make up their own stories all the time with that. You even have Telltale now that's going to be making, actual stories within that world because it's got so much potential for that. And so I think that it wasn't so much other companies looking at Landmark and going, oh, we need to do that same thing. It's like they were on similar trajectories already. And there's those parallel lines that say, oh, these two games, even though they were developed separately and weren't looking at one another as they were going, they've ended up in similar places. And I think you'll see more and more of that.
You brought something up there that was pretty interesting. I'm actually going to come back to it because I want to answer another question I want to put in another question that somebody else had answered, but I want to ask you about Telltale a little bit later. So the question was, shifting my question slightly due to your response about how sandbox and lore. Given what you're saying, Morgard, how do those players' interaction-driven stories then get canonized and become an in-game history as opposed to isolated incidents?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll use an example from 38 because, in case there's anyone, we should have made this clear at the start of the show. I don't work on EverQuest Next or Landmark anymore, so I don't want to speak for that team or anything like that. So I'll use an example from 38. So we were doing something, again, parallel development. We had these ideas for these big world-changing events. And we had this chapter-driven storyline that was going to play out over a series of years. And we wanted those events to have divergence in them. So a given server may go one way, it may go a different way. And those repercussions would live throughout the life of that server. But that does raise the question of what becomes canon, which way becomes the authoritative way. And so what the challenge for us became, we wanted to acknowledge that there were these outcomes in the world, but we didn't want to branch infinitely off of branches. That drove engineers crazy. They were like, wait, you want to do what? And you're like, because they need to manage all this stuff. You need to have servers that know the state of the world, and they need to bring that to life. And if you're diverging off of divergences, things will go crazy very quickly. So the way we structured the story was that the through line was going to play through itself. It was going to reach certain points where these big events would happen, and it didn't matter. While the outcome of the previous chapters was going to have an impact on the world and would make things feel very different, it didn't cause these new events that were coming to break. So you just have to be really cognizant of the effects of the story that you're telling and structure things in a way to take into account what you want to do in terms of the branching storylines. And if you're smart about it, you can construct a story that way that still allows all that player agency to happen while still keeping things manageable for your server guys and all the people who are responsible for maintaining that state of the world in the game.
Great answer. All right, cool. And one question it's kind of about the forums, and I guess I'm going to kind of shift it around a little bit. It was by Aldrinian. He wanted to know what it's like having to, when you're on a forums as somebody who is a lore master. I don't know if you care if I call you that, but I'm going to call it to you anyway. As a lore master, like when you have a fan base, people that that are looking to you for lore and you don't want to spoil anything and they're kind of, especially with in a game that has like an open development, like how do you feel about having to like hold yourself back from like telling some of the stories that you want to tell or like giving people information? Like the question was essentially like, how do you feel having to hold back from telling stories to people on the forums?
Well, I don't, even though you may think this way from some of the posts I make, I never enjoy teasing people and going, haha, I can't tell you that kind of thing yet. I'm a guy who loves being a storyteller, and so I want to tell stories. But I just know that it's going to be more rewarding to let people experience these things in game rather than just having me tell it through exposition. So what I tried to do in my posts on the forums was bring up points that I either knew weren't going to be coming to life through gameplay, or if I could leak details from history that would make those points even more rewarding when people finally got to them. So, I would always have discussions with the other content designers about how much we wanted to reveal, even in the novellas. Is that telling too much? Is it revealing too much? And one of the things that I've learned in my career, especially working on the early days of EverQuest 2, right? We had all this backstory that we made for it, and we were like, oh, and what we'll do is we'll put this stuff in game and we won't reveal what's really going on behind the scenes, and players will somehow uncover it. And what we found was that players didn't really uncover it, and a lot of that lore and background work that was done didn't get found and it didn't get discovered, and so it wasn't real. Story is only real if people can experience it, if they can hear it, if they can absorb it and bring it to life through their characters and all this other stuff. So when we would get on these discussions on the team of like, all right, maybe we shouldn't tell them that, maybe we shouldn't reveal that, I would tend to be the one pressing for, no, let's put it out there. Because then, you know what? It puts pressure on us to come up with even more stories on top of that and more things to put into the world and let people find and experience on their own. So I'm not one for holding stuff back just for the sake of holding it back. I think that that's a mistake that game designers can make. So I'm always in favor of putting stuff out there. There's plenty more ideas that you can come up with and put on top of it to add even more layers to what you're doing. Don't be afraid of putting your stuff out there.
Yeah, and as a content consumer, and especially somebody who does really like lore, I actually think that it's kind of nice. I thought the interaction, the way that you guys would drop bombs, was actually awesome. Like I was kind of somebody who at least got to be in the reciprocating end of getting Lord bombed, because I would be able to talk to you or Jeff. Some of you guys were on the stream, and sometimes you would be in the chat and you would say these awesome things. To me, it was a really exciting experience to be together with all these people in the community and just kind of like get hyped over the one thing that you said. I mean, it was really exciting. So, I mean, for as far as I'm concerned, I like the way that you guys were, kind of giving out the lore, and especially with the lore books too. I thought it was really nice.
Well, part of what I was doing too was I was kind of waiting for people to ask the right questions. And it was
tricky.
Really fun, especially in, right towards the end, right before the layoffs happened. We were getting to a really good place where there were people on the forums who were putting pieces together, because now there was more stuff out there so they could kind of connect the dots. And it was raising questions that I could then answer, or put something else out there for people to think about. So it was reaching a really good place, and so the guys that come after me will have a lot of stuff to work with, and hopefully carry on in their own way.
You still you still owe us a question after Dreaming in Shadow comes out. Are you going to answer that one, or you're not going to answer that one?
Well,
after it comes out.
Yeah, the problem is that it's again, it's not my place to answer questions about that story anymore. I will say that I was still I have a great fondness for that story, and I was just chatting with Drake today, and he sent me he's laying it out right now, and I volunteered to look over it just to catch any last minute errors and things like that. So I'm very keen for you guys to get the story, and I'm going to be watching to see how people react to it, because I think your minds are going to be blown. I know I've been saying that for a long time, but I promise you there's stuff in here that is going to blow your mind.
Wow, that's almost as enthusiastic as Dave.
It's good, and you never, you always delivered. The stories were all amazing, and the lore was really always shaping up, and I can't wait to see whatever it is like that you do in the future with lore. And also, going back to what my question was before, you brought up Telltale. Like, that is such a lore driven environment. And it's so fun. I mean, damn, those games are really popular. It's almost like a new genre of like instead of watching them, it's like a movie game. I don't even know how to explain it, but is that something that you really enjoy as a consumer or as a creator? Like, have you done anything like that at all? Or
I've never done anything like that, but I love Telltale, and I love that they've been so successful with what they're doing. Uh, I think it was the Walking Dead game that really brought them a lot of eyeballs because people are so in love with that IP. And they did such a great job with it. And now they've, the stuff they're doing with Game of Thrones and, Tales from the Borderlands, and they've got the Minecraft stuff coming up.
And the
That's
Wolf
just
one,
a
too.
great company. And I love that there's companies in the world that are so narrative focused because it does say, even though it's very, it's not going to appeal to every type of gamer because it's very light on the game side, but it's so well done on the story side that people who are hungry for that kind of experience now have a really high quality outlet for it. And I'm happy about that.
they haven't really released any high fantasy like type of games. But the Game of Thrones is kind of like, it's more like medievalish, I think.
Game of Thrones is low fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it generally gets considered low. All those labels, whatever.
I just want some damn, like, a lot of dragons. I need more than 3 dragons. That's all I'm saying.
See, the Game of Thrones, the whole Song of Ice and Fire IP is one of my favorite things. I love that world. And I love it because it's about people. It's not about, there's magic and weird stuff that happens, but it's about people and people's interactions. And, that's one of the things that I tried to do on Amalur and on EverQuest Next was to look at it like these characters, even if they're big, huge, burly guys or little tiny, skinny guys or whatever, they're human. And they have to feel human. They have to be relatable as humans, no matter how different they might look on the outside. And I think that that's the real strength of George Martin's IP is that he's disguising all this stuff behind medieval fantasy and whatever, but it's really about how people interact with one another, how they treat one another, and bringing history of a world to life. And it could have been in space, it could have been whatever, but it's the truth of character that really comes through.
Hey, while we have you on, I'm gonna sneak in a question. How do we get some more people of color into our games so that it's not all everything is based on European looking people, even though there's different races. All the elves are European looking, all the dwarves are European looking, and with the dearth of people of color designing the games, it seems like that doesn't get factored in a lot.
That is a really hard question, and it's something there's a lot of game makers who try to be cognizant of that, and it is kind of hard to be honest. From I'm this old white guy, and the stories that I'm most familiar with from my life are different than what a lot of people of color would have experienced. And so it's hard to make, you always hear people say, write what you know. And there are certainly people who are capable of going beyond that. And I like to think that I'm capable of going beyond that to a certain degree, but it definitely takes people out of their comfort zone. And I don't even think that it's a conscious choice all the time. There are certainly sometimes, as we've seen in the media and certain stories that have broken, where people do decide, no, we're just going to make the white male character, the straight white male character, because that's what our budget is. That's what we're going to do. But I think in a lot of cases, it turns out the way that it does because that's what the game makers themselves are familiar with. And I really hope that there is more diversity in the industry. That's why things like Gamergate are so tragic, because it hurts the diversity of what we could achieve. And so I hope that we can all do a better job of making a concerted effort to bring more points of view, whether that be based on different races being involved, different genders, different sexualities involved. I think that we can do a much better job as an industry, and it's something that I'm going to keep trying to be better at, and I hope other people do as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I had like almost 20 years ago, one of my high school friends, Persian woman, said to me, you can see yourself on a billboard. I can't see myself on a billboard or TV. And that just changed the way I thought of stories, because often, even for myself, my default character would be a straight white male, because fantasy, that's what it is in fantasy. And that started me thinking, why does the character have to be this? It could be this, it could be that. And I wish we could get more of that 20 years later in games.
Man, I do too. And, I think I grew up on Star Trek. Like, that was the thing that when I was a kid, this tells you how old I am. And when, there wasn't sci-fi on TV, like we had our 4 network channels, well, 3 networks and then PBS, and maybe like a local independent channel, and we'd have to turn the dial on the TV and stuff. But one of the few things that I did have was reruns of Star Trek. And to see the power of that, to have this diverse cast, like I guess I took it for granted growing up that, well, that's just how it was, that's what Star Trek was. And you really have to think back to what TV was like at that time, what the world was like, what the nation was going through at that time, to have a show that had an Asian male and an African American woman and all this stuff in positions of power. It was extraordinary. And so, Nichelle Nichols always tells the story of how she was ready to quit Star Trek and walk off the show. And she met Dr. Martin Luther King, and she told him that she was going to be leaving the show. And he said, no, you can't, because it's so important that you're there, that people can tune into this network TV show every week and see a proud, strong African-American woman on there and having this role. It's doing so much good. And man, we just need to get to those places with games too, where those characters are just there, and hopefully we have enough of that people don't need to think about it anymore. That it's just part of what gaming is. That there are strong characters of all different nationalities and genders and preferences, and that's just part of being a gamer, is being able to have fun with exploring all those different things, and that you don't have to just play the straight white male character anymore. That would be a great place to be, and I hope that as an industry that we can get to there.
Well, I want to ask, when because we've talked this whole conversation, a couple of the ones previous to it, you mentioned making the characters feel human in the game. I'm wondering, as a lore master, senpai, do you think that when you're creating story that it's a good thing to try to pull away from reality and pull away from some of the human nature that exists and try to just create a world where things could possibly be different? Isn't that the whole point of fantasy in a sense? So do you try to pull from your real life experience and what you see in Meat Space? Coined by Neuro, or do you actually just try to envision a whole new fantasy, arbitrary from reality type of world?
Well, there's no one way to go about it. Ideally, you're trying to do a mix of things, because you can tell, a lot of powerful storytelling comes through contrast of things. So you take the familiar and you flip it around 180 degrees and take it in a different direction, and people can still relate to it because there's elements of it that are familiar, but they hone in on those contrasts now instead of what they might be familiar with and what they expect. So there's no formula for it. You can't say do it one way or do it the other way. It really comes down to doing what's right for the story. And I think that if you work on your craft over time, whether that be pure writing or game making or whatever it is, hopefully you learn more and more ways to take the expected and make it unexpected. And it's not just about uh, the M. Night Shyamalan twist all the time. Like it worked really well for Sixth Sense, and like nobody saw that stuff coming. But then you start looking for patterns because we're humans and we all look for patterns in everything. It helps us define things. And then now he's stuck. He got stuck in that. There's always going to have to be the twist. And people are sitting through the movie going, oh, here comes, all right, this is what the twist is going to be. Oh, it's going to be this. And it took away from watching the movie because now you're just thinking about that one thing. So ideally you're switching it up enough and you're not getting penned into only one pattern where you can say, okay, for this I might play with people's expectations. Here I'm going to do a twist. Here I'm going to let things play out maybe the way that they assume it will, and that's okay because I can do something different with it down the road. So it just becomes about knowing your craft and maximizing your talents as a storyteller or game maker or whatever it is.
That's awesome. Good info. I'm sure there's a lot of, I mean, I feel like if I was going to write a story, not that I ever have, but I feel like that would be something that I probably would personally struggle with, is figuring out, like in a fantasy setting, do I just say like, oh, well, I'm going to make some shit up in the top of my head, or do I actually like try to dive into, humanity and realism and pull, or pull them together. And I guess that's what you're saying is different places work with different things. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing that Bob Salvatore has drilled into our heads, was that you had to, no matter what, even though you're making this fantasy thing, you don't want to ever rely on, well, it's happened because it's magic, or, that's, it's fantasy, so we can do what we want. You have to create a world that has a consistency and a continuity to it. There has to be a believability to the fact that there's magic in this world, because you want people to think through the implications of whatever the surrounding is, whether it's magic, technology, some mix of them, whatever it is. It has to be believable within the context of the world. It has to feel genuine. And that sense of making something that is genuine is fundamentally important. Good stories have that sense of being genuine about them, no matter what genre they're in, no matter what the background is. And you can always tell when a story doesn't have that. You may not be able to point to the exact things, but you'll feel it. You'll feel it if it does, you'll feel it if it doesn't.
Awesome stuff. Damn, I say the word awesome so much. As talking to like a wordsmith, I realize I need to not say that. I do have a question for you, totally random. Are you excited at all for the World of Warcraft movie? Like, do you care at all?
Yeah, I've played that game a lot, man, and I want it to be a good movie. I want every genre movie to be a good movie, because there was a time, especially as a kid, it was really hard to love those movies. I mean, I watched Beastmaster in the theater. Have you ever watched Beastmaster?
No.
You know what movie I'm talking about? Diggs must know.
I do. Mark Singer, yes.
Yes. Tanya Roberts. Tanya Roberts coming out of the lake was like, oh. But like that was the stuff that I watched. Like that's what I grew up on, and it's terrible. You can't watch it now. Those movies are unwatchable. So I want every genre movie, whether it's a superhero movie, a sci-fi movie, I want those to be great movies, because it proves that you can tell great stories through genre fiction. And so I want the Warcraft movie to be great, because then it will help it'll help an EverQuest movie get made. Yeah. Maybe someday an Amalur movie could get made. Whatever it is, like it gives people confidence. And so I want it to be awesome. And also I think, Warcraft is a great IP, and that there's a ton of great potential for movies in that. And so I hope they do it right. I think the director is awesome. So there's great potential for it to be something fantastic.
Well, everyone, I think we actually are nearing the end of our show. I think we still have a lot of questions, so sorry everyone that we didn't get to. I guess all that means is Steve, you can come back next week and we can answer them then.
I'm happy to come back. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, anytime. I can actually not see where we're at within the whole Twitch setup because my internet sucks. So I'm just going to start with me as far as wrap up. Steve, I appreciate you coming on. We really, really do. It's been a great time talking to you, and really look forward, hopefully, to you joining us again as often as you like.
Cool.
So
Cool.
I have no idea where we're at within the Brady Bunch bubble here. So someone else go.
Yeah, just go clockwise.
Yeah,
Then-
just
then
go
it-
clockwise.
I can't see clockwise, so
Let's
go.
yeah.
Valence,
Talking to me? I didn't hear so many people
The
talking.
person,
Name. So
Wrap
I'll
up.
go. But anyways, yeah. So we brought Steve on this week. He just happened to be available, and I had mentioned something, and he had mentioned he was available. So we're really happy to have him. You know, he's been on before, and a lot of great discussion. I don't know if anybody noticed this. We kind of took this a little bit different direction than we have been in the past, and kind of opened things up to a wider variety of games and games of the past and things that Morgard is familiar with. And that's something that we're actually looking to do more in the future and start expanding. And although, you know, EverQuest Next will always be our roots and Landmark 2, that's how the show got formed, but we've realized as a cast that we are passionate about game design and game theory, and we want to really focus on those as topics, and that's definitely going to include Landmark and EverQuest Next, and we're going to cover, you know, those games specifically. And I think everybody here, every cast member here, is a big fan of MMOs. That's our passion. Kind of like Steve was saying, you know, he wants to, if he can, stay in MMOs. But you know, he's open to other things. And I think that we're getting to a place in the industry where there's so much cross genre stuff, and things are new technology is allowing things to change and us to stretch things in different ways that, you know, we're going to be looking at things as well as a show and trying to branch out to other places. So that's something to look forward in the future. We also are starting up on a new channel next week. So for everybody that has been a follower of the show and been bouncing around channels with us as passionate fans, thank you for that. We are I'll be posting as soon as I get done closing here that we have a new Twitch channel, Theory Forge. So I'll post in the chat, and you guys can click there and follow it, and that will be where we'll be broadcasting from the future. But I don't have anything else to say personally, so thanks Steve for coming, and thanks everybody for bouncing around with us. And I will pass it to the next fellow.
I believe that
Zen.
next fellow is me. All right, cool. So yeah, I had a great time. Thanks, Morgard, of course, for coming out. And it's lots of transitions, as you guys know. We've had a crazy couple of weeks, considering that our roots in EverQuest Next and all the things that have been happening. But I'm really excited for the future of this show. We're all kind of. I got all, you know, sentimental in the chat, and I was like, yes, we're coming together for more than just, you know, a bunch of EverQuest fans, and we're actually starting to, like, we want to create more content than just you know, what we were seeing for EverQuest Next, and really talk about all sorts of different kinds of MMOs and, you know, hopefully other things as well. So we're gonna have a lot of really interesting guests over the next couple of months. And that's as far as the show is concerned. That's all I got to say. I'm streaming League of Legends like 6 to 7 days a week. We do lots of viewer games, so if you guys want to join us at this stream, the one that you're currently on, it's a great opportunity for new players to come in, get involved in a community, because trust me, you don't want to get involved with the rest of the League of Legends community. But you at least have a place where you can feel comfortable, come in, have a good time, not be judged, and mess around. And so we try to you know, create that environment for you. So if you liked what you if you would like to try that out, feel free to hit the follow button. Otherwise, I don't think I have any like major shows coming up recently or soon. So that's it from me.
Well, so hey, thanks for having me a lot. This was really fun, and I hope to do it again. I will definitely come on some more now that I have the time and the freedom to do so. I'd even think about creating my own Twitch stream, but I think people would get tired of hearing me talk, so I'm not sure. I'll think about it, though. Maybe we'll do it once in a while. But so I'm dusted off mobhunter.com. That's where you can see different articles from me, and I will tend to talk about storytelling and narrative stuff on there and exploring some of the ideas that we talked about today. Follow me on Twitter at Morgard, And when I know where I'm going next, I'll definitely be letting you folks know. And I just want to say, that I saw this question kind of flash by in chat a little bit, about the people coming after me on as far as EverQuest Next goes. And I just want to say again, these are some great people. I love that team. I have a lot of friends there, and I'm a fan of the game. I'm a fan of Norath. I'm a fan of that universe. And so I want them to do well. And I think that they're going to make something that is going to be really exciting for you guys. So I hope that you'll support them and follow them. And yeah, thanks a lot for all the support you've given me over all the time that I was on the project too.
Well, I want to thank Morgard for coming on. This was a blast. I still got tons of questions, so I can't wait for him to be back on again. And I want to thank the chat, because the chat was so positive. That could have been a very different experience. And it's been great hanging out with the hosts. And you'll find me on Twitter and the forums and dropping around. So have fun, guys.
Yep. And I gotta say, it's awesome having you on again. I really hope we can have you on a lot more. And if you do consider getting the stream going, if you need any help promoting or anything, us and everyone else are definitely, down to help out. We would love to see it. We'd love to, learn whatever we can. Personally, for me, it's so unique because I can't really talk to too many people that have been in the space of creating games with procedural storytelling or very dynamic storytelling. So for me, it's such a unique and exciting thing. It's something I've always been into procedurals. I had a show last year actually just dedicated to procedural games. That's how much I love them. So I gotta say, it's awesome having you on here. Definitely looking forward to talking with you a bit more about this stuff in the future. And as for me, everybody, I do a lot of broadcasts, live feature review on Wednesdays, dead feature rant on Tuesdays for H1Z1, content and creations on Sundays for Landmark Tours. Thursdays is the My Dream Show on the My Dream channel. Monday nights, I'm usually doing the Who's Gaming Now broadcast on the Who's Gaming Now channel. I do a lot of stuff. And the last thing I wanted to say here is, wrapping up, we're going to be sending this party over to one of our good friends, one of my good friends, actually, I've known for a while here, a developer making the game Korea. It's Siege Games. It's Jason McMorris. Dude's totally awesome. He's just gotten back to streaming. He's been kind of touring, vacationing around while working on the game here. So that's where we're going to be heading. Korea is a 2D sandbox with, really, it almost felt like 2D Landmark before Landmark was even in our hands. So it's totally awesome. Definitely check it out, folks.
Also, before we go, Sog has been in chat. Has not been able to join us on cam today, but thank you very much for keeping everyone entertained. So with that, I guess, are we signing off? All right, guys.
See you next week.
Thanks, everybody.